going to ask the easier ones first. The first question I have, in 1996, India was 51, and you started, even your husband came back and started when there were so many opportunities around the world, and certainly in America. And 1996 was not Hyderabad of today. It was very different. What gave you that courage? What gave you that confidence to come back to Hyderabad when there were other businesses? Of course, there were some other big businesses, but what gave you that will and that strength to do that journey? And we have to look back and understand and learn, because Coimbatore next is about the future, and we want to understand about your past in that.
Shankar, this is kind of like a goosebump moment for me. I mean, to be among peers, friends, colleagues, several of you with whom I have spent maybe more than a decade and a half at CIA, and even otherwise in many of our professional engagements and careers, having known the city from a very young age in my own personal way. As Shankar said, I grew up not very far from the city in a small town called Naval Lignite Corporation. So I do have that little bit of my roots in Tamil Nadu. My father was a first-generation mining engineer who founded Naval Lignite Corporation in 1953. So that's where the entire ethos comes from for me personally, growing up in a very small community of engineers and doctors and professionals, and of course the officers from the administrative services, and then going on to I mean, I was not the first bencher in my class, though many of my classmates went to IIT Chennai and Madras Medical College and so on and so forth, but I ended up in Madras University studying economics. But nevertheless, that was how life, I think, shapes us for many things that we don't know what the future holds in order for us. This is the first time, as Ravi mentioned, the first visit after the pandemic. I remember my visit last time was in 2020 of February. I was here. It was a personal visit. And then this was also my first visit to Coimbatore in the absence of CRS. CRS is someone that I don't need to talk to you all about. And he is one who has always left an inedible mark in all our minds and hearts. So this is my first visit without CRS in the city, to a point that I can't imagine it without him. Having said all this, my journey in 1996 began when we were back in the US at that time. We moved in the early 80s for higher learning, for training, for better education, higher education, exposure, experience, knowledge seeking. That was the purpose of leaving India and going to the United States. And then it was more than about 13, 14 years there when I was getting a little anxious, or maybe a little restless. And I stood up to Krishna and I said, I'm ready to go back to India. Would you come along? So that was how this journey began. Initially, he probably felt that I was joking, or that I was probably not having the depth of the answer to the question that I had posed to him. But I was ready to engage back in India, to leave the United States after that many years of being there professionally. And when we came to India, I know that we did not come into a bed of roses. It was in fact a bed of thorns. I know there were many entrepreneurs who are role models and who have done this much earlier. And so 96 is not like a benchmark kind of a thing, but there are several examples in this beautiful city that we know, and from the state, from the south of India, and many of the other southern states that we have come across so many entrepreneurial stories, the zeal, the passion, the ideas that they all brought forth. They were all startups at that point of time, whether it was 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 75 years ago. So we felt that in our own journey that we had to start it off, and we said we would identify gaps, the gaps that existed in India at that point of time in terms of what, in the life sciences especially, because that was where Krishna's training and background was all about. And then we said we are going to go back and jump into entrepreneurship. There was a passion and there was a strong passion to build technologies. It was not to come to India to make copycat drugs or generic drugs, as we are known to call them, because coming with a very scientific temperament of a very long career in academic sciences and research and development. And then by then India had signed the GATT treaty, and we would have had to also abide by those international regulations, so on and so forth. So we were very clear from day one that it was innovation that would drive this organization and nothing else. Even for the short run, there was not one product that was manufactured that was a generic product. So we waited for the long run of building technology, of conducting R&D in the country, partnering with institutions, government institutes like the Indian Institute of Science, public funded institutes like the Indian Institute of Science, and several others in the country we have partnered with, and we ensured that the ice has to be broken, because we as a small startup back at that point of time, we were not going to be able to do everything ourselves. So we understood where the gaps were in terms of the organization, in terms of our own personal resources, where the gaps existed in the country, what kind of initiatives need to be taken forward to build India as a powerhouse of technology, and also to be creators of product development and not just being contract manufacturers.
In a time when so much of talk about startups and valuation, and your story is all about a true startup in every which way, but bringing so much value to this whole country. And thank you for sharing that moment of decision making amongst both of you to actually reach here. But at the heights of the pandemic, when we spoke, you spoke about the fact of how difficult it was, and complexity is part of any country and reality. You spoke about the challenge of how to get testing, to do things on every which way. And when I got to know the amount of processes that every batch of vaccine has to go through, how difficult was it to face so much of questions, so much of disbelief, not from the world, but from within? How do you have persistence in such ecosystem? Because this is not only COVID. I'm sure you faced this in the last 25 years. Today we are celebrating Bharat Biotech, but in the 25 years up to this moment, what gave you and Dr. Ella that confidence, that persistence to say that we will reach global excellence?
Shankar, when we, again going back to the startup days that we had, we started from scratch, so we take a lot of pride in that. Krishna and I are first generation entrepreneurs, and both of us didn't come from entrepreneurial families. Krishna hails from an agricultural background, and I just mentioned my father was a mining engineer in government service in his entire career. So the very sum and substance of this was as to how we think larger than life, think out of the box, take decisions on our toes, literally, not waiting for somebody to come and spoon feed us in terms of how things had to be done, whether it was going and standing in line for that first telephone connection, or whether it was going to the collector's office at the Rangareddy District Collectorate to sign the document for purchasing 10 acres of land from the government of Andhra Pradesh. or whether it was, walking up into any one of the government, the secretariat and the offices, or even for that matter, the central government, because we come as a highly regulated sector. Biologicals, pharmaceuticals itself is a highly regulated sector in the country, comes under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And and then biotechnology is further another 10 or 100 steps ahead of the pharma, range of work that we can all think of. Because this is not done in India before. This is something for the first time being done in India back then in 1996. So as a country, we did not have guidelines, we did not have policies, we did not have the vision for what India at 75 should have been when India was 50. So there were all these kinds of, we probably did not have the financial temperament. I don't call it financial resources. We had enough financial resources, but the temperament was lacking to support the kind of work that and area that we are talking about. Then the perception of an NRI was also something sometimes that would come up. Are these people talking sense, or are they just going to, come here, dabble at something, and then get back after 2 years, because both of us were, permanent residents at that point of time back in the US. So these kinds of challenges were always there, but the first product was launched by none other than Dr. Abdul Kalam himself in 1998. That was the hepatitis B vaccine in Hyderabad. And I can still recall his words when he said, I quote, he said, "I have a 3-vaccine dream for India." He said it's hepatitis B, malaria, and HIV. I think, I unquote, this was October 22nd, 1998, and I think maybe 24 years later now, I would not hesitate to say that we probably have taken his vision to our heart, and to this day we have at least, we have accomplished one, we are close to accomplishing the second vaccine, and I don't know whether the third one will come around too in our lifetime if we pursue the path that we are pursuing. So every single product has been approached as if it was something like our own, the passion with which science was brought to the table. The discussions were about science, the discussions were about technology. So for even me, who was a graduate of, not from being from the sciences, I would also be a party to all these in numerous discussions, product research, collaborations, and also then evolving it into a product, because commercially developing a product is something. Because many banking institutions would come back and tell us that, oh, how would you expect us to be waiting for you for 36 months or 48 months to bring out a product which is viable, commercially viable, and licensed by the Government of India. So I'm not talking about an OTC product which I don't need to have to go and get any kind of approval process or a licensure from, but I need a licensure from the Drug Controller General of India under the Ministry of Health. So under these circumstances, every batch of vaccines get tested. The facilities had to be created from scratch, to the point that the financial institution was taken aback in 6 months or 3 under that when we went back and asked for the second tranche of the disbursements to happen, because they were not sure whether what was happening on ground. So they flew their team from Bombay to see what was happening in Hyderabad, because Krishna and I would probably have spent 18 hours on site. Having said all this, the culture of innovation has been at the heart and soul of every one of us in the organization. However, irrespective of the cadre, the level, or the capabilities they bring to the organization, because we always believed in this and we took pride in this, that we did not want to make generic vaccines for the world from India. So if you take our entire portfolio today of 16 vaccines that are out there, including Covaxin, every single vaccine has had a product development cycle of not less than 10 years. So you may then turn around and ask me, how did you go and make a vaccine in 9 months? And that the answer for that would be, if I have to say this again and again, is just the human spirit and the endeavor that our entire team committed to this kind of rigor in terms of innovation and research and development and clinical research, which is not done in this country for any of these products. Any of the Western, the companies, organizations from the Western world, if you pick up any product that is out there from any part of the world, whether it's a Japan or a Korea or a Europe or the US or Australia, all of them would have to go through a very long, stringent process called clinical research and product development, which is nothing but regulatory, confining to the regulatory norms of the national regulatory authority of whichever the country where you would want to market your product. So this would have to start from India, of course, and then later on it goes to other territories and markets, or to the UNICEF, where the WHO comes into the picture. So the rigor that was established in past vaccines like rotavirus, for example, was a 15-year-long journey of research and development that took place between both countries, between India and the United States, because it was a Indo-US vaccine action program under which this project came under, initially supported by both the governments, but later on came in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who then further funded close to $70 million in order to bring the third rotavirus vaccine from the world and the first rotavirus vaccine from the developing world, and the two from India, which was Rotavac, which came out of Hyderabad. This was a 15-year journey. When you talk about this length of time, the intensity, the severity of talking to about 100 or 200 of the best of the brains in around the world. We had about 15 to 20 institutional partners. They were not private. They were all either directly government entities or they were international agencies of their very high stature, and also institutions from the United States like the Stanford and so on and so forth. Many organizations and institutions of that caliber that you would have to absolutely be on the dot, on the line every single day, that you have to engage with them. And this was only possible not because of our size, but because of the passion and the intensity that we brought to the table, and also maybe a kind of a strong, adamant, I would not call it adamant, but a little strong-mindedness in terms of saying that we will not give up unless it is tried. If we fail, it's okay to fail. So that was the approach when we have presented ourselves to these kinds of experts from across the world, in order to be a part of that kind of a collaborative process, and then bring forth the lowest costing rotavirus vaccine in the world today is made from India, and that is Rotavac. And this was a commitment that was given to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because that was the only condition that they had asked, that we make it available for $1 a dose for public procurement. And that is what is happening today, ever since that agreement was signed 15 years ago. So the entire procurement for Government of India and for UNICEF and for Gavi and for any of the international governments and procurement agencies, the pricing never changes. It's $1 a dose for each vaccine, for each dose, and that's how it goes.
Just listening to you, in the one of the Coimbatore slides which came in Prashant's presentation, it said audacity. It said audacity to, Coimbatore should think like that. But just to listen to your journey in a country where we feel our phones, our shirts, our cars are not good enough if made here, to actually trust our lives with something. And you had to not only fight the world, competition, the government and its process, and a few million of us are WhatsApp questions who had things just to get this done. And to do this, I can only imagine what you, your team and the company had to go through. Can I switch to a slightly more personal question? To actually think, I saw your phone, the phone rang, I'm sure the mother is calling, or somebody is calling in between. There are many of us here from family businesses, there are young students, women, men. The lure to stay back in America, there is an aspiration for the green card, even for visit visas are still 8 months away, to do something easier, to do something generic. But as a woman, as a leader, as a co-founder, as a startup venturer, as somebody who had to face the brunt of Dr. Ella, we know is a scientist, right? He thrives in creation and he's not the best in many of those challenges. How is this journey? What is resilience to you? How do you do this?
I've always been a multitasker, Shankar. This started off from my very young years at Naval. I was always encouraged by my parents to not to take the easy route out. It was always the longer road, or take the cycle to school. The car doesn't drop you, or any other form of comfortable transport. Even the school buses were there, of course, but we always took pride in doing things ourselves, being independent, being self-reliant. If I should say that the value systems came from home.